While we're getting set up here, I'll say a little bit about the history of George. So, not going to work? All right, we'll go this way. Do I have to, can I set this off? Maybe. So the Civility project was started in the fall of 2020. The university had, this was, if you recall, was the first fall under COVID, and the university had been worried about freshmen. They'd heard a lot of news that freshmen were going to postpone a year and wait for things to settle down, which would have been real hard on the university budget. So they made some cuts, and some of my work got cut. Later that summer of the 20, I went and talked to Robin Baker, saying, look, you've given us a severance package and you're paying me not to do anything. That doesn't make much sense. Let's see isn't there anything else we could do that made more sense? And he said, I've been worried about the church and our country and our community, Newburgh, because everything seems to have become so polarized lately. So many sharp divisions and feelings of mistrust and so forth across those divisions, polarization. He says, I've been thinking we should be doing something about civility as a university. So we talked about that in that fall. We ran a couple of events, sort of as an experiment before the election, which were well received. So we went ahead and decided that I would work half-time on the Civility project for the university out of the president's office. And I've been doing that since then. I'll be doing it for at least one more year, it looks like. And then we've been doing it year by year. We're now trying to make some plans to make it maybe on a more permanent basis, that we had an ongoing Civility project. Part of that depends on lots of things, hires that we need to make and so forth. What I want to do today is an example of the kind of things we're trying to accomplish through the Civility project. Other than making presentations like this to churches, I think this is the fifth such presentation I've made to a church or a church group, counting last week and this week as one presentation. I've worked with some church, I've worked with some other groups who are experiencing divisions, and that's part of what we're doing. I'm also working in the community in the Newburgh area, and I've helped form a group called United as Neighbors in that town, which is a sort of a cross-political, inter-partisan, I suppose, group that's trying to help folks in Newburgh handle their disputes more constructively. For example, we are putting together a meeting on, a get-together meeting, get to know each other meeting for the 10 candidates for school board this spring. We're inviting them to get together on April 4th, just for a social time, to get to know each other, so that they will be people to one another, and maybe they'll moderate their campaigning, and whoever wins will be able to work together. And so that's the kind of thing we're working on. I have there's a little sheet with some of summary of the slides like I had last week that you should have a copy of. You'll be using that, I hope. If you look at it, the first one there, maybe besides the picture, I can't remember what's on it. I didn't bring myself one. Paul, is there an extra one there I could have? Yeah. And the one besides the picture says response number 1. While I'm nattering on here a little bit as an introductory, I would like for you to be thinking of a person, or even better, maybe a group, with whom you have sharp disagreements and maybe strained relationships. And all I want you to do is write down on that piece of paper, if you can. There's pencils in front of most of you, except Dwight, who sat in the front row. He's got his own pencil, good. Write down a name or an initial or something to remind you of that person or group while we go forward. I also want to point out, I wish that Pastor Mark was in here because I have a question for him. It's like this is a 3-part presentation. I thought it was going to be 2. He doesn't have to come. If he was here, I'd have a question. I'll ask the question anyway. Because last week I introduced the topic of disagreement being a gift. And maybe there's more providence than you're aware of, and that could include our disagreements. And then we started the service this morning by singing Let All Things Now Living, which is really a song of thanks and praise to God for all the providence that we enjoy, all the things that God has given to us, built into the universe around us. We talked about the rain and the mountains and the rivers and the fountains. Oh, I was going to ask you, Mark, when did you plan today's sermon? Oh, he's got a mic there. Does he carry a mic around all the time?
When did I plan it?
Yeah.
This week.
Okay, I was wondering, because it fits right in between my last presentation and this one. And
well,
did you do that on purpose?
As I was writing it, I realized this sounds, there are hints of what Ron was talking about last week, so it was my intuitive goal to set you up for this morning.
So I've noticed the verses in that song refer mostly to the physical world around us and the amazing things about it. I mean, you know, as far as I can tell, the universe isn't necessary. I don't mean that we don't need it. It's just that it wasn't inevitable. I don't know why there is a universe. There could have easily not been, and nobody would have noticed. The same is true for you and me. Why am I here? How did I get in the game? You should be all asking yourself that. How did I get in the game? It wasn't necessary that I would be here. Somebody else could have been born instead of me, and nobody would have noticed. There's also a mystery. So those are really profound providence, profound gifts, our lives and the universe itself and everything in it. And as I mentioned last week, there's a lot more providence in the universe than we know. We keep discovering, hey, this is useful. These funny rocks here, there's minerals in there we can use. Or this plant, or whatever. We can put things together in ways that they don't occur in nature and make fantastic things. All that is discovering gifts that were just lying there all along, but we had to discover them. And I'm trying to point out another one that's been lying there all along that I mentioned last week and that the sermon today also emphasized. It's that we are different from one another. This is part of the gift. It was built in. And we experience those differences often, not only, but often as disagreements. And those disagreements are just as useful to us as the oil under the surface of the lamp, probably more useful to us because we discovered that oil largely through disagreement. There's an article today that I saw on the BBC. I spent a lot of time on the BBC website. And I read one this morning about a Scotsman in the late 1700s who looked at some rocks at the beach and said, wait a second, how did this happen? Because there were these rocks that were laid this way, very ancient rocks that were laid vertically, and then right on top of them are rocks sideways. He says, how could this possibly have happened? And that was one of the keys to our discovery that the world is a lot older than 6,000 years. Because that couldn't happen just in 6,000 years. I suppose God could make it that way, but by natural processes, it would take millions of years. And so the article was called The Abyss of Time. And I'm just saying that we keep discovering. They discovered that was part of the geology, our understanding of geology, that led to the discovery of lots of our deeper minerals and fossil fuels and things like that. So the disagreement that comes from our difference is just as much a part of what's built into the world as everything else. We talked about this last week, disagreement being a gift, and this is the review from last week in case anybody wasn't here. We've talked about disagreement as a gift, that we were designed to disagree. It's not a mistake. It's not a flaw in our human nature. We are on purpose designed. God wants us to disagree. God wants us to disagree. It's not a sign of our fall. It's a sign of God's grace. We are equipped to learn from those disagreements because we can converse with one another. And we can we've learned to record our disagreements and write them down, and so we don't have to keep discovering everything every new generation. And we've developed political systems that allow us to work through our disagreements. Political systems are the ability we have to develop political systems and political systems not just at the governmental level, but within churches or families or other groups. Any group that's making decisions is a polity. We political scientists know things about everything because every time we make a decision, it's politics. And so every polity we have that pattern of human beings making political systems which allow us to deal with our disagreements, so that's part of our gift. And then if we have a gift or a resource like disagreement, then the response for that is stewardship, just like any other resource. That's how far we got last week. And so I want to talk about today about ways that we can develop responses to make our stewardship more than accidentally effective. You want to disagree with my overall premise, says D. Cox wants to disagree with my overall premise. Yes, it is okay to disagree with my overall premise. Do you propose to do it right now? Do you propose to do that right now?
Right now.
You want to disagree at the in the moment?
Well,
Put that right up by your mouth, Dee.
It was interesting that, to me at least, that you were listening. It's great to disagree, but you were expecting agreement on that point. And it seems to me that if it's great to disagree, that there's room in all points.
Yeah, it does mean that if I'm practicing, when I remember my own preaching, my wife the other day, it's about a couple of months ago, we'd had a little bit of dispute with one of our children, and I was expressing my frustration, and my wife turned to me and said, "We should be thankful for disagreement, right?" So, yeah, I get it. Here is a devotional thought that I got from one of your normal sources, which is the National Conference of State Legislatures. Not my normal sources, but I noticed this. Came out about a year ago with this statement: civility is about disagreeing without disrespect, seeking and finding common ground as a starting point for dialogue about difference, listening past one's preconception, and teaching others to do the same. And I had already been thinking about there being 3 levels of civility. And I looked at this and said, oh, well, they've not broken into 3 parts, but the 3 parts are there. And I'm going to show that to you. So the first is civility is disagreeing without disrespect. The key point being here, respect. And I would add to this more than just respect. I would add to it love and compassion and caring for one another, the kind of kindness we normally talk about when we talk about disagreement. So that's the first level of disagreement, the personal civility of personal kindness, respect, helpfulness, etc. When we normally talk about civility, this is mostly what people talk about. It is a virtue to be civil. There are some weaknesses in that view that it doesn't address. When Martin Luther King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail, he was responding to pastors asking him to be more civil in this sense. And he said, well, yeah, but there's injustice. So I can't just be quiet and kind. There has to be more to it. And these are where the other layers come in. So the second layer of civility is they've described in these 2 points, seeking and finding common ground as a starting point for dialogue about differences and listening past one's preconception. We're going to do a little bit more with it, but it describes the stewardship of the disagreement itself. When we have a disagreement in front of us, that is a resource, and we need to be stewards of it. And this is a starting, and we're going to do a little bit more, about how to be a steward of that disagreement, the specific one in front of us. And I'm asking us to embrace it. Say, oh, thank you. You've brought us a present. I don't mean that in a snide way or a snarky way. I mean in a real way. Because the disagreement you bring us is a chance to learn, to maybe heal relationships, to make better decisions, and to do justice. I just read again for about the 50th time the letter from Birmingham jail last month, and I forgot to look. I didn't go back and look to see whether he thanks the pastors for their letter. I think he probably does, but Martin Luther King then gives them a pretty long letter and does other things than just thank them. But it turns out that it's probably a good thing that the pastors wrote him the letter to which he responded, because we got his letter back, which is one of the classics in American political literature, I guess. So it's a good thing. And then the third part, beyond stewardship for the specific disagreement, is taking care of the way that we manage our disagreements. From my point of view as a political scientist, I'm talking about our political culture. I mean our political culture nationally. I certainly mean it locally in Newburgh right now, and I certainly mean it also for churches, including the Quakers. That we need to tend to the relationships and the community we have and the norms we use to deal with one another. And so it's civility in this case, it's stewardship of the political culture. We're trying to resist despoiling our culture, ruining it with the ways that we act. We want to repair our broken relationships, we want to hone our skills, and we have to learn to build trust across disagreement. And so I want to talk today about these three things, these three levels of civility, and work towards ways to respond to the situations around us in light of these three levels of civility. So, personal civility, disagreeing without respect. I said seeing and respecting ones who disagree, but then I thought maybe it'd be better to also mention that we should seek them. Seeking them and seeing them. By seeing, I mean more than just noticing that they're there. We need to actually, give attention, close attention to our neighbors, including the ones who disagree with us. Not just notice that they're there, but try to see them as they really are. I don't know if I can express this. I find it difficult to express this. But to want to understand them, to really see them deeply. I wrote a reference. I do a lot of these. When you're a professor, you write references a lot. I wrote a reference a couple years ago for a guy who had come to George Fox, semi-illiterate. And this was because of his own very difficult upbringing as a kid and the brokenness of his family and poverty that they experienced. He could hardly express himself without confusion or writing, but he was very into it. He worked real hard. And he worked real hard for 4 years. And he made a big growth in all those areas. And we decided, all the faculty in that department decided that he was probably one of our star graduates ever. He came in so rough. He was still rough when he went out, but he had developed a lot. His grades at the beginning were very poor. He didn't have a very good GPA, all that kind of stuff. So I had to write a reference. He was applying for difficult to get what do we call it? It's kind of like an internship. That's not the right word. Fellowship with an organization back east in public affairs. And so I had to write it, please, you have to see him. Don't just look at his numbers. Don't just look at his record. See him. And I put it in italics and bold. And then I tried to tell them what they should be looking for in him that would show them that on first glance, he doesn't even look like he's finished his, he still had burrs in his writing that weren't perfect and so forth. And they gave him the position, and he's thrived, thriven. See, I need to work on my writing. I don't know what it is. He has, somebody help me, thriven? Have thrived? Okay, I'm overworking this. I'm married to an English professor, but I am not one myself. And And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. The surface impression is not enough. We need to really see deeply in the people. And that's part of this first level of civility. It's not just being kind as a habit. That's good. That's better than not being kind as a habit. But it's not enough for this level of civility to really see the person and still respecting them, even though they disagree. And then, of course, once we see them, we need to be kind, considerate, affirming, helpful. If your political enemy, you spot them in the grocery store and their groceries have just spilled all over, what should you do? Kick the groceries down the aisle to make things worse? No, you should go pick them up. That's just basic kindness, seeing a need and reacting to it, even though the person's a pain in your life, perhaps. Showing empathy, connecting to what they are experiencing. So this is mostly, I'm saying this about how to show love to the other person, but really if you're going to take advantage of the difference that other person has, you're not going to be able to do that fully until you empathize with where they're coming from. Somebody may be making it an argument publicly or in a church that you're pretty well convinced is just a terrible argument, and you might be right. But if you just shut them down, you've just not read the assigned reading. It's a terrible thing to do, not reading the assigned reading. You haven't done this. That guy, that person, is a little bit of assigned reading to you, sent by God. And if you just shut the book and don't read it, you might as well not have shown up for class because you're not trying to learn. I don't know, this is the first time I've tried this image, and I think there's some weaknesses in it. But anyway, the idea being that that person is there for you as well as for them. And you're not going to take advantage of the opportunity until you've shown empathy. And you have to understand what they're experiencing. And this is work. It is work. You can't do it for everybody that comes along. It's impossible. But you have to be willing to do it, particularly maybe for people who are your political opponents, wherever that politics is being managed. And then this is sort of an initial idea to help set the standards, set the conditions, I should say, to trust. This is why we want to do the Get Acquainted meeting amongst the candidates at the school board for Newburgh. I don't know if people here pay attention to Newburgh school politics. It has been in the news. I read a piece in an English news source about the Newburgh school board once, a couple years ago when things were really at their peak for the Newburgh school board. So we have made the news, and most of this after I lost my election in 21. So it's mostly not my fault, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, whether it's my fault or not, it's been in the news, and part of the issue has been we have had periods where people on the school board were in a healthy relationship of disagreement. I think that's a healthy relationship, but except for the fact they didn't trust each other, in which case the disagreements are very hard to handle well. And we think that maybe by having them be in a low-risk, semi-private environment where all they're going to do is talk, interact on a social level. We're not going to have them debate anything about school board politics or anything else. That we can maybe start on at the first level of civility to make some conditions for trust. That's one of the hopes we have, anyway. So that's personal civility. Anybody got questions about this? I have an assignment. I'm a professor. I'm sorry. It's a failing of mine. I'm not going to grade these either. This is fantastic. You get to do them, and I don't get to have to grade them. I'd like you to take, if you have one of those sheets, take a minute, and I'd like you to list ideas, including wild ones, for how you or your group might seek, see, be kind to, show empathy for, and or nurture trust with the person or group you wrote down on response 1. I'm going to give you a minute to just think about what might I do to do first level civility towards those people or that person. Next one, and then we'll see. So the second layer of civility that I talked about was civility as stewardship of the disagreement Remember, disagreements are a resource, like any resource that we have was been given to us by God. We should be stewards of them, not for ourselves. We don't own them, but for God and those around us. So I don't think that if a check came in the mail, you would think it was awful, you would hold your nose, you would embrace that check. You might actually embrace that check. Depending how bad it was, how bad you needed it, you would embrace it. A disagreement coming your way is like a check. It's a resource that you need to think of as a way of something you need to steward. Treat disagreement as a gift. We've talked about that. A chance to learn, make better decisions, do justice, maybe heal relationships. This is not my natural response to disagreement. I am getting better at it, but I still have to remind myself, or have my wife remind me if she happens to be handy, to treat disagreement as a gift. I'm not used to thinking of it as a check that's just been written to me, or a present that I should be unwrapping. This one is the one that came from the state legislative group, National Association of State Legislatures, to listen past preconceptions. I really like that. Or assumptions, that'd be another way of looking at it. We look at people and we, for good reasons, have a habit of making pretty quick generalizations. The good reasons are we have a lot of things to do in life, and we have to have some reason to something other than throwing dice as a way of sort of assorting those into higher and lower probabilities and so forth. And it becomes important earlier in human history, it became very important to be able to distinguish between the nice kitty and the big cat. And to know which one you could play with and which one you should have nothing to do with. Or it becomes, one of my sons once burned his hand on a hot wood stove. Now he knows better. He has a reaction not to touch the hot wood stove. So we do this partly out of good reasons, but it's not the only way. We need to also have a thoughtful response to the things that we encounter, including disagreement. And this is the one that really helps us, if you have it in your checklist, helps us to stop and think and listen. Was there a question here? Okay. And there's a lot of things we could do about listening. In my conflict resolution class, we spent a week on it. I don't have a week right now. So the way I would summarize what you're trying to accomplish, the best way I know of, is to listen until you could state the other person's point of view to their satisfaction. If you were here last week, you remember that this little rule that I have about listening is the one that got me to try to listen to Satan's motives during the temptation of Jesus so that I could understand what Satan was trying to do as an exercise in one of the more difficult cases. Most of the people you talk to aren't Satan, and so it should be easier for you to try to get into their head and figure out what it is they're saying. And you won't know you can do it, you've done it, until you could state their point of view to their satisfaction. You could try this. Let me understand, see if I understand what you're trying to say. You are saying this because of this, and that you want to see that because of that. Something like that. And when they say, yeah, that's what I mean, then you've listened to them to meet this test. If they say, kinda, well, you say, okay, help me fix it. What did I get wrong? What did I miss? What more should I know? Until you get that to their satisfaction. When I am teaching mediation training, which I do sometimes, mediators have to be the ones mediators are people that meet with people who have a dispute. They don't decide the dispute, that would be arbitration. They just help the parties decide the dispute. In order to do that job well, they have to listen until they could state the party's point of view to their satisfaction. They do that in front of the other party, and later they'll ask that other party, maybe, to state the first party's view to their satisfaction. That's a key hallmark in making mediation successful. If you can get them to do that, it's almost always successful, 90%. And that's the key to it. So that's the standard use. And when along there, while you're listening and making your best attempt to state their view to their satisfaction, you should be able to note ways in which you agree and ways in which you disagree. In mediation, that's the next thing we do after we get there. We say, okay, let's see what points we agree on. We list those. What points do we disagree on? We list those. And we start with the points we agree on. Let's see how we can make these things happen that we agree on. We both say we want to see this happen. After the last school board election, a new majority took over the school board at Newburgh and wanted to make sure there were no Black Lives Matters and signs or gay pride flags in classrooms. So they wrote up a new policy. And their argument, so this became you can see how this would become a polarizing argument right from the beginning. There are a lot of people who work in the district or parents in the district who were upset about this because they wanted their minority kids or their friends, minority kids' friends, their friends, the minority kids in the school district or the LGBTQ kids in the school district to feel welcome in the classroom. And they understood those signs to be there for that purpose, to help them feel welcome. The people opposing it didn't really articulate their full interest in the same way. They talked about politicization in the classroom, and I think that was a concern of theirs. But I listened to the debate on that. This happened from July 2021 through the fall. I watched on video, on Zoom, all those meetings, every one of them. I never heard anybody say that it was okay for some kids not to feel welcome in the classroom. Nobody would have said that. Nobody asking to remove those signs would have said that. Nobody asking to keep the signs would have said that. They agreed, although they could never articulate it to each other, they agreed that every kid that shows up in that classroom should feel safe, including the children of police officers, many of whom see Black Lives Matter signs as a declaration of kind of war on police officers. Shouldn't a police officer kid feel welcome in the classroom too? I think had the group ever been able to say, oh, here's where we agree, that every kid should feel safe in the classroom, they could have asked their teachers, help us figure out a way to make every kid feel safe in the classroom. Make sure the LGBTQ kids feel safe, make sure the minority kids feel safe, but do it in a way that doesn't make the children of police feel unsafe. And I think they could have figured out something. It would not be that hard. But because nobody was listening for where they agreed, in the board apparently, I couldn't tell that anybody was, they were very, there was a lot of angst and pain there in that board at that point. And it was very difficult for them to hear each other. And a lot of it in the community as well. Somebody needed to be looking for that common ground so that they could find a place to stand to start to fix the problem, the real problem, for everybody. Along with that, seeking common ground is a human connection. We talk about that, where I recognize something about your humanity and I empathize. I'll tell you one more little story, and then I'll ask you if you have any questions on this. I did a mediation once between a landlord and a tenant. The tenant the house in regard was the landlord's childhood home, and he was now renting it out. The neighborhood had changed. It had become less safe and so forth. And the new tenant was having trouble meeting rent, had a job but not a very good one, and was trying to get a better job, had kids, single parent. And that mediation was very difficult until somebody asked the landlord what it had been like to grow up in that neighborhood. And he described, a pretty stable middle-class neighborhood, but the main thing he remembered about it was that he could run all over the neighborhood. He knew everybody there. He would go into other people's houses. They would come to his house. Everybody felt safe. And the tenant said, boy, that would be nice. But that's not how it is now. My neighborhood is dangerous. I have to keep my kid inside the house. I don't want him wandering around the neighborhood. There are drug pushers in our neighborhood. There are other things in our neighborhood. And it was at that point, finally, that the landlord connected humanly to the tenant, and vice versa. When they talked about how nice it would be if people could, and also, you know, the house had been run down, and there were problems with the house, and things leaked and whatnot. And that was where they made a human connection, and that's when the mediation turned a corner and went someplace where they could reach an agreement. There has to be that human connection between folks. Questions about that? Comments? Yeah.
That concept
Okay.
of the active listening, and that
Yeah.
is how incredible that works with children in schools.
Yeah.
It's a transformational experience. It's not simply, I get it cerebrally, but you also, they comprehend it emotionally, and they connect with that person. It's just remarkable.
Yeah. That's the kind of connection that needs to happen across the divides that we have. All right. Encouraging collaboration. Another image that I use is to get people on the same side of the table. Actually, sometimes physically, but mostly, I mean, psychologically. Usually, difficult disputes are experienced as tugs of war or a battle. If you have a common ground you can start from, then it's possible for you to become workers side by side. For example, in the kids in the schoolroom, how do we make sure every kid feels safe in the school? And if it's done that way, then ideas like, hey, maybe we should have some of the signs in Spanish, don't necessarily look like you're trying to replace the white kids with Hispanic kids. You're just trying to make sure the Hispanic kids feel safe. Or things like that. Can we take down the Black Lives Matter sign because it makes some kids afraid? Can we put something else in that still has the affirming purpose of the Black Lives Matter sign, but doesn't trigger fear in anybody else? Is there such a thing? I'm quite confident there will be. That kind of thing. Then show grace. Here's one that's very difficult. I'm a competitor. If you play Catan, Settlers of Catan with me, anybody here play Settlers of Catan? I will cheerfully cut you off and doom you to last place. I have a little bit of empathy for you and a little bit of, but it's a game, right? And I'd like to win. And in politics, it's considered to be a coup when you basically destroy your opponent so they can never win. Maybe somebody needs destruction. I don't know. That's probably a hard thing to say. There are some people that, I don't know. That's probably a hard thing to say. I don't want to go there. When I ran for school board, I did not run an expert campaign. I'm a little bit ashamed of my campaign. But one thing I thought I did right is on my website, I put links to everybody else's websites. Because I wanted everybody to be found. I wanted all their websites to be found. I wanted to keep them in the game. There was they did a candidates forum. It was a little bit poorly organized. And when I discovered that some of the people, including the guy who was running for my seat, hadn't heard about the forum, and it was the day before the forum, I made sure he heard about it. I said, I'm sorry, it's not my fault, but you haven't got this, apparently you haven't got the invitation that was sent for you. There's a thing tomorrow. I told him. That's trying to keep my opponent in the game. Hey, it worked. He beat me, so apparently I succeeded. They are useful. The opponents are unresourced, even if depart from your compassion for them as a human being. They're part of the learning process that the decision-making should have, should gender in us. If they're not at the meeting, maybe postpone the meeting until they can get there, instead of just going ahead and making a decision. So I'm going to give you, we have time for another couple minutes. There are 2 more responses here. I think they're on separate slides on sheets on your paper. The first one says, imagine you could listen to the person or group you identified in response 1 until you could state their views to their satisfaction. Think of 1 or 2 things you might learn in that process. Just guessing. Actually, if you did it, you'd probably learn other things too. The second one is, where do you think you and your group would agree with the person or group in response number 1? If you started from where you and they agree, what issues would be left for you to work out together as a joint project? So take a minute or two and think about those questions. Think about that rather than listening to me if you prefer. And there's a pretty good chance that might be a better use of your time. I'm not suggesting you all leave at the moment, but if you have a little thought process going on in relationship to one of those responses, stick with it for a minute until you're done. So that's the second one. Let's go on I think I went backwards. Yes, I did. Okay, good. So 3-layered civility. The third layer is stewardship of the political culture. Political culture is a politics term. It means the way we go about making decisions. It's just like you could talk about other forms of culture. There are norms and values and practices and institutions and structures and all the stuff that goes with any culture. And you can distinguish the American political culture from the Canadian or the British. There are differences. I've been fascinated by British political culture, so I've been since Brexit. So I've been spent a lot of time reading about that, and it's different than ours. A lot of things are different. There's also political cultures in churches. They're polities too. They make decisions. And the Quaker political culture is distinctive from others, although I should say the Quaker political cultures are distinctive from others. And that's all good. It's one of our gifts. We make political culture. It helps us make decisions. That's one of the ways we've been equipped to be this fantastic information gathering machine as the human race. Really, the basic idea here is that when we're thinking about the stewardship of political culture, we're not thinking about one particular dispute. We're thinking about our ability to deal with disputes over time. And we can do things that enhance and strengthen our ability. We can do things that undermine our ability. Storming the Capitol probably doesn't really help our ability. Some of the practices of negative advertising in campaigns that make you sick of the campaign season probably don't really help our ability. And there are other things that can help our ability to make decisions as a group. So we think beyond the immediate situation to resist the spoliation of the political culture, and in the more positive sense, to help develop practices and behaviors that improve our ability to make good decisions together. A key thing that we're going to find here, and you're going to see it show up, is the notion that the best decision-making groups don't start with unanimity. That's the recipe for groupthink and for blindness. Any group that doesn't have disagreement in it is in trouble. And you should be very nervous joining such a group, especially if it's making important decisions. So unanimity is not the key. The key is disagreement with trust. We're going to try to get both those things together in one place. So the first thing about thinking beyond the immediate situation is what we can do just sort of to make fundamental preparations. The word debubble, I believe I haven't created that word. I hadn't seen it anywhere else. It sounds like a word that could be created 1,000 different places at once. It's a response to the idea that we are in bubbles, in political worldview bubbles. And this is something that we've been able to do most powerfully recently because of social media and the internet and the algorithms that feed us the stuff that we agree with and preserve from us the stuff that we don't agree with, because they want people selling those algorithms, the advertisers want you to get on a website and stay there and not be kicked off or pushed off. They want you to like it there so much that you go back over and over again and stay there. And so they'll only give you stuff that you like. And everybody does that. So oddly enough, kind of counter what we thought probably coming into this era, the modern era of social media has made us more polarized rather than less empathetic with others rather than more, because we feed ourselves a constant stream of information that's already been screened for us not to show much disagreement. So the first thing you can do is get out of your bubble. Debubble. Go find people that don't agree with you. Hopefully you have some in your family if you're lucky, because you will probably run into them and you have good excuses to go talk to them. Wouldn't it be great if you have people in your family that you disagree with? I think I mentioned that my wife and I have never agreed much politically. I think I told you last time that we only voted for the same president once. Now, I don't want you to assume you know who I voted for. I do a lot of write-in voting. I wrote in my wife once, and she did not vote for herself that year. It's the only person I can think of that wasn't going to send drones across the kill people around the world on that particular election. And so I wrote her in. There's a whole reason behind that. You can ask me about it. It's a 15-minute talk about the purpose of voting, where I have my own particular views. Anyway, but only once in, 6 or 8 elections, how many have been? 6 or 7 elections since we got married have we voted for the same person. So I have built in somebody who disagrees with me on about, I don't know, 30% of my positions, I suppose, maybe more. Not all of you maybe have that grace. I don't know why you picked the people you married with. Maybe you should rethink that. It's a little late now. But no, that's a good thing. And when we throw in my kids, who've gone all these different directions politically, I can have disagreements with a lot of people. So I'm lucky. And I'm also talking with students all the time. Some of you may have to work harder to debubble than I do, but it's good for you. Get out of the bubble. Find the people who disagree with you and go meet with them and get to know them and be friends with them. Yeah, I've got a question. Paul has a question or a comment.
Yeah, well, I really like what you're saying here.
I think you have to touch the bottom. There's something at the bottom, way at the bottom. There you go. Thanks. Didn't go.
Hello?
Yeah.
I really like what you're saying about not just debubbling, but bi-bubbling. Because
Bi-bubbling.
In other words, take in both bubbles.
Oh, yeah.
Because a report from one bubble about the other bubble is often going to be biased.
Yeah.
And so you just have to, okay, is this report on that, is it really, an accurate coverage of what's going on? And so just intentionally looking at different media, outlets. Also, I wrote in Della for president a few years ago.
Oh, did you? Was she 35?
No.
Oh, then she wasn't going to win. At least the person I wrote in was 35.
I just couldn't take either of the candidates. So, but a comment here. Aristotle talks about politics as the highest conversation of community virtue. And what he's talking about is, what is of interest to all people. And what is, how to think about civility, how to think about virtue in a corporate social setting. And just hearing you talk, wouldn't it be great if we could think about politics as the highest level of corporate endeavors and interaction, instead of just one group trying to vie for power? So my question, how can we elevate the discussion of politics to wanting the best, wanting the most truthful, wanting what's going to be helpful to the most people, as opposed to just winning or gaining power within political systems?
Well, it requires us to think this way a little bit, to think beyond the immediate. What am I doing to the political system? It's the same thing we have to do when we decide not to throw the trash out the window. You're getting rid of the trash, but you're despoiling the environment for everybody, and it makes the whole system less safe and less healthy. Now, trash out the window is probably trivial, but pouring things in the river or emissions that we make all the time. I mean, we have to be conscious of it in an ecological sense, and there's an ecology of our political culture too. So, I know that in the current school board election, there is a group of people supporting some of the candidates who have told the candidates, if you do this kind of campaigning, this kind of uncivil campaigning, we're not going to support you. It doesn't matter if the other person wins, because it's not worth it to us to win this election and continue to ruin the political culture. And until the candidates think of it that way or know that we're thinking of it that way, it's going to be difficult for them to resist the temptation to despoil the culture to win now. The next thing on this is crossing trust borders. This is I'm thinking of a trust shed as kind of like a watershed. A watershed is where the water lands and all flows the same way, right? So it's a defined territory. This is in the Columbia River watershed. This is in the Colorado River watershed. Continental Divide. We tend to be attracted to staying within our trust shed, where we trust everybody, more or less. It's hard for us to step out to places where we don't trust people. And another way of thinking about debubbling is thinking about stepping into a different trust shed. Does that make sense? A different zone of trust that's not where we fit in or we feel comfortable. And the idea for that would be to help find trust there, or help develop trust there. Tend the soil. There's a woman in Hillsborough I met in September. Her name is Cindy Consenzo. She runs an organization called Just Create Community. It's basically her, she's the main mover in this. Every week she has a coffee, and she invites anybody who wants to come. And most weeks there's a pickleball games, maybe 2. And she invites people to come play pickleball. And they go on hikes, or they go tour. One time they toured the Caterpillar plant in Hillsborough somewhere. I didn't know there was one in Hillsborough until she told me. Or things like that. Or they go visit a bunch of businesses downtown, and they go for lunch or whatever. All these events are just, she makes an invitation to anybody who wants to come. And I went to see why she was doing this. She says, I'm trying to help people not fall into hating each other. I want them to meet each other. If you meet people, you're less likely to hurt them. That's her whole argument. All she's trying to do is get people at random to get to know each other. She's not directly trying to affect politics per se, but she is trying to affect alienation within the community. She wants people to feel welcome in their own community. And she wants them to get the situation where they go to the grocery store and they see somebody. They were met at one of her coffees and they say hi. And just try to build those kinds of connections. My concept of what she's doing is she's tending the soil. She's trying to make the soil rich for the possibility of trustful human connection across difference by having them have other kinds of totally non-political interactions. She's going to come and talk to our United as Neighbors group. We haven't quite set it up. She's going to be doing an event, Civility Project event. If you want to hear about these events, you can sign up back there on a piece of paper, or there's a QR code there, and I think on your handout. Did I put it? Yeah, it's on your handout on frame 11, and you can connect to that, and we'll make sure you get our announcements. But on April 10th, she's coming to do a presentation along with somebody from Sisters, Oregon, where they have a different kind of group working on civility, much more organized and more institutional. 2 different visions, and it would be very interesting to talk about it. Building bridges, making relationships across those borders. I'm almost out of time. Resisting political cultural despoilation. Don't let friends demonize their political opponents any more than you let them demonize the person of another race or gender. It's no better. There's really nothing. It's still the same kind of unkindness and unlovingness. It should be just as much taboo. Don't attribute motives. Don't distort information if you can help it. And don't reward candidates who do. Let them know that they're costing you support when they do it, or when they don't stop their supporters from doing it. Skills for joint cooperative problem solving, listening practice, joint activities and projects. I'm going to say something about that, go back. Joint activities and projects, that's part of what Cindy Consenzo is doing. Having people work together side by side on things where they didn't sort themselves first politically or by ethnicity or any other thing. They came because she did one where they were making Valentine's cards with blocks. I don't know how block printing, I don't exactly know what that is. But they had an event where people came and block printed Valentine's cards. And people come because they want to do Valentine's cards. And they could be of any political persuasion. And you can design joint activities and projects. It's one of the reasons we're having this dinner, or not really a dinner, kind of a reception thing on April 4th for our candidates. And then build trust. This is important. Give and ask for and give trust loans. This is an idea that I got from one of my former students last year. We were working together with a church, and she said, maybe we could introduce the idea of trust loans. I said, that's great. What's a trust loan? And she said, it's when you trust somebody with something relatively low stake, just give it a try, take a risk, and see if they carry it out and fulfill what you need them to do. So you can build trust. Start with something small and build up. Trust loans. Be trustworthy, note trustworthiness. Okay, now there's a response 5. I'm going to let you read that on your own. Obviously, I'm out of time. This is where you try to think about how you might implement some of these things with the people you've written down. If we had had another half hour, which we don't, I'm not asking for half an hour now, I would have had you meet with one or two others and share the ideas that you wrote down in your responses and talk about them. You can do that on your own time. Maybe you'll go home with somebody who's got their own list. Paul, you and your wife are here. So, I mean, I'm not saying you have to do that. I have no power over you, but just a suggestion. Okay, I said already things about well, that's a good idea, the list here. Some of the things that we do for the Civility Project, again, if you want to know about that, go ahead and sign up with there. Or you can use this as the QR code if you're QR code facile, if you know how to do that. Just aim your phone at that and it'll link you to the website for the Civility Project. And you can get more information. Yeah, you did. It works, yeah. All right, thanks, folks. Again, I'll be around for a few minutes if you want to ask questions of me privately, but it's the top of the hour. You only have 4 hours and 45 minutes to go home and eat before you come back and watch about volcanoes, which is, I know, what you were really looking forward. I was going to try to engineer some kind of volcanic activity in here as a competition, but I don't think I managed that. So thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.